Welcome back to another episode of Beekeeping Buddies. I'm Steven.
And I'm Luke.
We're here to talk about what we're doing around the yard this week, and it's mostly prep for the fall and upcoming winter. We've got goldenrod is in heavy bloom in our area. It's been super dry.
Yeah, it's very extremely dry, and the flowers, I think, are reflecting it.
Yeah, not a lot of nectar flow.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it. Now, this time of year, normally, especially in my big yards, I can walk up 25 feet away and smell goldenrod, which I would say has a dirty socks smell to it.
Gym socks, yeah. People have equated it to that, yeah.
Gym socks, or if you're a beer connoisseur, I would say a hoppy smell to it.
Yeah.
Now, the honey itself, I think, is pretty good. It kind of has a butterscotch taste to it. It's not it's a real...
It's certainly one of those flavors that you're either going to be for it or against it. It's not a sort of a, like...
It definitely has a butterscotch, to me, notes. There's notes of butterscotch in there. Now, it doesn't taste like dirty socks. It doesn't smell like dirty socks.
We've certainly had some mousy ones that we've
had mousy ones before. Barnyard ones.
That is not that.
With a barnyard finish. If it's mousy because a mouse drowned in it, that's something different, right?
Yeah.
This was mousy, just a mousy finich, and it's near a marsh.
Yeah.
And I really think it's something in the marsh that's blooming.
Yeah.
That causes that one, but that's not goldenrod.
It's not goldenrod. So I checked the weather station before we started. We're at a different location this week. We're filming. We're recording at my house this time, and the weather station says that for September so far we've gotten no rain, like zero.
Yeah.
So it's been super dry here. Although it sounds like, and then we kind of had a nice week there right around Memorial Day weekend, and then it got hot again, and we've been in the mid to upper 80s and only down into like the 70s, maybe down in the upper 60s.
Which is unusual for us this time of year.
Yeah, for September, usually we're starting to get a nice fall, but then the week that I'm going to leave for vacation and be out of state for the first time for a long time, we're finally going to have our fall weather roll in. We're going to have, sounds like we're going to have some rain and back into the 70s and 50s. So we're finally going to get some fall weather in here, but
which is important for beekeepers too, right?
Yeah.
Because Formic Pro, which is one of the treatments people use quite a bit actually here in the area, requires the temperatures below 85 because the off-gassing is so fast above that you tend to what they call smoke queens, or you kill off your queens.
Yeah, that chemical burn, I guess.
Yeah, and so I had 2 hives that I somehow fitted in, like, it just barely fit in the 10 days, but now I'm going to take a small break in between that, and then I'll put my second treatment for Formic Pro on those hives just to give them some time so it's not going to be 90 degrees, and so that stuff won't off-gas so fast that it kills my bees.
We were taking note of what our honey stocks were. I was finally in mine. The hive that I had the flow hive on, they were up there working the flow hive. They seem to have patched. So we talked about this a little earlier in the podcast back in spring when we got them. There's two sides of the flow hive that are designed to separate, and when they separate, there's a wax seal. So they're intentionally fabricated with a tiny gap between them. And I guess the bees come in and seal the gap with wax, and then that's when you shift you use the little wrench to shift the thing. Those are the actual seals that you're breaking that allow the honey to drain out the bottom. And so they appeared to be in there working that, patching up all those little spots, putting wax in all of them, but then they never seemed to put any honey in them.
Same with mine. They have not put they patched most of it. And didn't put any honey in it, and are real crabby now. When I pull them out, are real mad that I'm up in there, and you have to have a queen excluder.
So I ran a queen excluder, obviously,
you have to, otherwise you get a huge mess.
Yep. And so I pulled both the flow hive off, not having anything, and I set it aside. So if there was anything in it, I could strip it out. I pulled the queen excluder off, went to look in the box below it, and it's a 100-pound honey super, just like it was when I brought it into my yard.
Yep.
So they were more than happy to take all of the space of my upper super and completely fill it full of honey. So
Yeah.
of my hives in the yard, that's the one that is best prepared for winter, even though I took that same super off for harvest and basically extracted that entire super, and then I basically put it back on wet, and they were like, great, we'll just fill it up again. And so I think I went down in the bottom box. I still had doing brood things down in the bottom box. So I pulled a couple of frames and tried to move them around, moved a honey frame over to a light hive and put a honey frame down below. And
that's an important part of beekeeping that we skip over too, right? You can balance your hives, right?
Especially this time of year.
Especially this time of year, especially with the amount of feed. So I have a couple of hives out there that are heavy, and I'm a big guy, 6'2" and like 270, and I can lift some weight. And I have a hive right now that I really struggled to lift the back end to figure out how heavy the thing was.
Yeah.
So it's got quite a bit of weight on there. I am totally able right now to pull, especially I would pull the frames off the outside.
Yep.
And move them to hives that are not super honey.
They don't have the weight.
They don't have the weight. They don't have the weight to go into winter. Right. And that's something that actually I do tend to do. You can actually move that even into the bottom,
right,
deep, and that actually will help them, especially at the beginning of winter, as they need something to metabolize, and they move up through the hive through winter.
And we'll go through this exercise as the beekeeper, and then be in there 2 weeks later and see that they've moved it all back where they want it, and you're like, well, what am I even doing? You're like, well, but it's still, the suggestion, right?
It's still the correct move in my mind for that. And something else interesting as we're talking about weights, we had our club meeting. We had a guy talk about winterization. He used to be the president of the club. He does a good job, did a good presentation. I don't see eye to eye with him as far as what he does for winter compared to what I do. I really believe in limiting our airflow through the hive, right, and keeping all that contained. But I did talk to some of the other members there who've been keeping bees for a while, and asked them about what differences, because years ago I gave a presentation, I guess it was 2 years ago now, I gave a presentation where I thought that insulating your hives in the Midwest was an important part of, at least providing wind break, was an important part of being able to keep your bees alive through winter.
We at the time we had some heavy losses in the prior years.
Yeah.
And we had just started to use some styrofoam hives, introduce some styrofoam hives into our apiaries they use these a lot in Europe. In Germany, almost all of their hives are styrofoam insulated hives, and they're like, well, Europeans are typically on the front end of the curve for beekeeping trends in terms of their mite treatments, and I'm like, well, so if they're doing it and they're successfully beekeeping, we might as well give it a try here. And we were seeing what we thought in both of our apiaries, some better survival rates out of those insulated hives, and that's what really put us on the track of thinking, hey, there might be something to providing more insulative value to our Midwest hives for better overwintering.
Certainly, if not better survivability, they consumed less honey over winter and survived with more honey coming out, which to me said, overall, I'm consuming less and I'm more efficient hive. Even if it's not survival, right? Because I don't know if we have the data to say I have documented better survival rates.
We don't have that kind of data sets, but I have definitely seen more honey on the better insulated hives that survive, and I think we can pretty clearly attribute that to you have to consume calories to make warmth, and we consume those calories off of the honey that we eat. And so if we're expending less calories to keep the hive warm, the same temperature we want to keep it at, that's going to show up as consuming less honey. And
you're for the rest of that cycle, right? You're defecating less too,
right?
Which is an important part, and which means you're not making the cleansing flights necessarily. And it was interesting because so these have been our findings. I asked the people behind me who were sitting there just out of conversation because they just switched over last year, and they found, and their statement was absolutely, we have a ton more honey left over coming out of winter than we have with any other method, and I think that speaks some to, hey, insulating, maybe it's not required for their survival, but certainly
for the Midwest. I think for Midwest beekeepers, a lot of the popular YouTubers in the beekeeping communities. If you're not the Canadian beekeeper, they're certainly way south.
Right.
And you got to remember that their weather means their beekeeping year is significantly different.
Yeah. Not only longer, right? It's a longer year for them as far as growth, but like their winters are much shorter.
Yeah.
And
if you define winter as a period in which they hibernate, because talking to the 628 Dirt Rooster, he was saying that in some years, their warmer years, they never have a clustering period, right? They're active basically year round.
Right.
And they're a cold overnight cold for them is 40 degrees, right? And it's back in the next day, it's 60 degrees during the day, right? Like you're flying the entire time, right?
Yeah.
So,
and the question there too, right? And I think that they have a problem because the bees are so active, they still they consume more,
right?
And they have a dearth, so they actually have to feed. Whereas,
or they end up having to keep just as many pounds on the hive as we do, but for different reasons.
Right. So you're not starving them out. So, yeah.
So checking weights around the yard.
And when you say check weights, I lift the back end of it.
Yep.
You told me when we first started, Steve was my mentor, and he said, "Yeah, you just lift the back weight, and it's about the right weight." And I thought, I'm never going to get used to that. And after a couple of years, you kind of calibrate your arm and go, oh, "Okay, yeah, this is roughly, these guys should be good, or this is way light."
Well, you also get a sense for it throughout the year because the weight of the hive changes significantly throughout the year between spring. The spring buildup, and then during the honey flow, and then as it slacks off, and you take all the honey, the week after you take 60 pounds of honey off a hive, like it weighs significantly different. And I see it with the stands I use. I have pretty small contact area. I have some they're deck boards, so they're up on edge, so it's only like an inch wide. So I have pretty small contact patch between my bottom board foundation and the bee stand. So the consequence of that is you can slide them around pretty easily. If they sit there for a long time, they'll kind of get stuck down.
Yeah.
But the point is, if it's a light hive, you go to try to pry a super off, and you'll end up scooting the whole thing around on the stand, and that's when it really brings to the forefront that, hey, this hive really is only woodenware weight if you're easily able to shove. If I'm easily able to shove that around on the stands that I use, I know I've got I'm really light on weight. This time of year I'd have an issue.
Yeah.
In the spring I'm going to be in it to see whether or not I've got a laying queen to see, because I should have weight for brood.
Even in the spring, if they're light, I'll feed.
Absolutely.
Because I want them to be able to metabolize enough to be going out to do work, to be bringing in the resources they need to survive.
You can get behind the curve where I won't lay. There's the number of times where I've added a frame of resources, whether it be pollen or honey, to a hive that seemed like it was just behind the curve. Like, I'm looking at the queen, she's laying, but it's not a lot. And I give her that extra frame or two of resources, and a week later, the laying pattern is huge.
Yeah, they explode.
Right? And our interpretation of that has always been they don't have the resources to support the brood that they want to raise, and therefore it's this slow snowball of I have to raise more before I have enough flyers, but I don't have enough flyers to bring in enough resources to really get ahead of the curve. So again,
Steve and I are avid board game players, and that you notice that, and there's a lot of specific board games where you have that exact mechanic, and so
you can
it's
get
really interesting to see.
Get out ahead early.
It's really interesting to see that in the.
But that goes back to our previous comment about moving moving honey around this time of year, right? Like, that is the reason why the Langstroth hive is as popular and as good as it is because those frames that are all identical in size and shape are intended to be pulled out, inspected, and moved around.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
like
absolutely.
This is an active part of beekeeping, is doing the role of going through your hives and moving stuff around as, like...
Which is an important part to highlight because so many beekeepers are afraid of their bees. And we see it all the time in new beekeepers.
Or they
want
to treat the hive they've painted green as the green hive, and the hive they painted pink as the pink hive, and the stuff from the green hive never mixes with the stuff of the pink hive, and never mixes the stuff with the orange hive. And I'm like, it's great you've got them painted green, pink, and orange for you, but you have to understand that the stuff inside the boxes, like the whole point of having multiple, one of the biggest advantages to having more than one hive as a beginner is it allows you to balance between multiple hives, several hives, in order to give you better chance at success.
So what's your suggestion on, hey, I'm a new beekeeper, what should I have for a hive setup?
It's going to be standard Langstroths.
Yeah.
8 or 10 frame. If you're a smaller individual and you're concerned about weight, I could see you wanting to start with 8 frames.
Yep.
The difference between 8 frames and 10 frames is just the size of the box. It's not fundamentally the difference in frame. It's not frame geometry, right?
Yeah, the frames are the same, whether they're 8 or 10.
Right.
The box is going to be just different sizes.
Right. But it's not like you've got all mediums, right? And because there are people who want to work all mediums, and one of the significant downsides to that is if you have a buddy who wants to give you a frame with a queen cell on it, and it's a deep frame, you can't put that in a hive that you have. You're going to be forced to put that into a 5-frame nuke, which is not the end of the world, right? Like, a mating nuke is certainly a thing that exists, but at the same time, being able to slide in some frames directly into a deep. So I would definitely start with 2 deeps.
Okay.
And then
Langstroth, 10 or 8 or 8
or 10
doesn't
deeps.
matter. 2 deeps.
I'm a proponent of screen bottom boards.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd have a screen bottom board.
Why the screen bottom board?
I feel there's benefits to the small hive beetle and mites. Early in my beekeeping career, we didn't have all of the treatments we had. So we had a lot of sort of incremental things you could do to help control mites. And I think it's been documented that in the grooming activities that the bees do, the phoretic mites, the mites that are on the outside of the bees, they do get knocked around and get knocked off.
So I'm going to correct the phoretic part because it's kind of something that I was educated on. Phoretic actually means has no negative impact to the creature that it's carrying around. So, like,
I thought that's the word they use for the ones that are not in the cells.
It is, but it's incorrect word. It's an incorrect word usage. So basically, they're just attached.
I'm just using the words everybody else does.
I'm just putting the knowledge out there in the world that says, hey,
right,
when we say phoretic, we mean attached mites.
Look, if you want to leave comments down below the show notes, if this is YouTube, right, leave us a comment down below about how you don't think that's right.
Well,
for everybody else.
What do you call them? All right, if you have a different word for them, they're attached. But I'm just saying, I always called them phoretic mites too, and I was educated that said, hey, it doesn't mean phoretic. But anyway, go ahead.
So it's the ones that are out roaming around.
Yep.
They do get knocked off with regular grooming and the regular interactions that bees have with each other. And so having those mites be knocked off and have an opportunity to fall through a screen bottom board where they cannot. So small hive beetles, they do fly, and if they get knocked out of the hive, there is a possibility for them to fly back to the hive and get back in the hive. But if you combine that, like down south where small hive beetles is a real problem, they put oil trays in the bottom of their screen bottom boards, and that is 100% an effective control for small hive beetles. And oh, by the way, it also catches mites. So there is a real benefit to a screen bottom board in terms of some of the pests and problems that we have.
And the debris that they kick
debris,
off.
yeah.
Like, that's something that we don't actually talk about as beekeepers, but because bees are relatively clean. However, they do kick off quite a bit of debris. Like I also use screen bottom boards. And underneath my screen bottom boards, I have I'd call it detritus, right? I have a growing pile of bee detritus. Whether it be mites or bee bits or
honey caps,
whatever they found in there that they need that they drop, they'll drop it. And
so many bee legs.
It's so bee legs and wings. Like that's
just and then some people, like back when that was introduced, they also introduced the idea of a sticky board. So it was a gridded board that you could put it underneath there, and then you could do a sugar shake. Which initiated the idea there was that it would initiate a grooming session where the bees would groom each other, and in the processes of that, they may knock the mites off of each other. Those would then fall down. 24 hours later, you could then count the detritus that was on your sticky board, and if you were good, you could identify the mites and only the mites as mites.
Yeah, per square inch.
And then make a translation between the number of mites you found per square inch and the percentage of mite load in the hive on a 24-hour drop. So the significant problem there is, one, we can do an alcohol wash in an easy mite check, and I can get people, I can pass that bottle of alcohol water, the easy mite check, around a circle of 15 people, and I will easily get answers that range from I see no mites because my vision sucks, and I count every floating bit of detritus in that jar, stingers,
legs, whatever,
everything as a mite, and I'll get anywhere from 0 to 15 when the actual number is 3. So when you talk about being able to identify a mite, especially on, I had a beginner use a sticky board, and the number of small hive beetles that landed on his sticky board and did not come off of his sticky board was phenomenal. He needed some proper small hive beetle traps, but the screen bottom board was doing his thing, and he counted every small hive beetle as a mite, and he thought he had a mite count of like 30 or 40.
Now, to be fair, I have had a hive with a mite count of 30 or 40. It didn't survive the winter.
Yeah. But I'm like, okay. I don't believe that number. Send me a photo. He's like, I'm looking at my sticky board. I'm like, all right, well, there's your first problem. Send me a photo of your sticky board. So he sends me a photo. I zoom in on it, and I count like 3 mites, and I count like 30 small hive beetles and a ton of other detritus, right? And I'm like, okay. So then I got to pull it into like paint, and I start circling.
Yeah, what the mite,
like
what a mite actually
is.
What
a mite is, or what the small hive beetles are, right? And I'm like, all right, all the green circles are small hive beetles. The one red circle is a mite. And I sent that back to him. He was like, oh, I was counting all the black. I'm like, yeah, dude. Yeah. So
now what I use those board for is after treatments. Usually I'll take a mite count with a wash, and then I slide the board under and do a treatment. Pull the board out
and see
24 hours later and go, what's my drop look like? And if my drop is significant and my wash is not.
That works really well for your oxalic acid, your vaporized oxalic acid treatments, because it's supposed to, air quotes, insta-kill on all of our, I'm going to use the word phoretic mites. So
with like a 98% efficacy, right? So it's deadly.
So it's a good way to sort of like, how bad was my actual count sort of indicative of what I was actually seeing in the thing.
Yeah, and did my treatment work? And because I've had treatments that like using a fogger, using just a fogger with the alcohol spray, that was terrible.
You had tried out a different kind of fogger, and it
was terrible. It didn't work.
So there's some challenges associated with a sticky board. I'm not saying we use that, but my point here is you can put things underneath the screen bottom board for various reasons that I feel have a beneficial impact to the hive.
So
and you can also put in a closure board, basically that sticky board. If you don't want that screen bottom board open for winter, you do have the option of sliding that board in, leaving that board in there over winter, and significantly reduce
Yeah.
The
And you basically have a solid bottom board at that point.
Basically. And I happen to know a student of mine who attempted to set up some stands like I had and may not have gotten them leveled well. Do you know this guy?
No, I don't know. No idea you're talking
He's
about.
sitting across the table from me. So he had them tipped toward the back. They weren't tipped toward the front. They may have been leaning toward the back.
Yeah, they definitely were leaning toward the back.
And it rained. It rained during the fall, and it managed to swamp the bottom, his whole inner bottom, solid bottom board ended up laking from 0 inches in the front to 3/4 of an inch, which is the height of the standard standoff.
Which looks just fine when you're looking at it from the front.
Yeah, because you don't see anything, right? You know, and then he takes it off, and there's this pond of dead bees.
Yeah.
In the bottom of the thing, and I'm like, if you had a screen bottom board.
Yeah. Now, these were my Russians. So they weren't real nice to start with.
And they survived.
And they survived that.
After this story, they survived.
They survived that. So often, right? I often say bees survive in spite of me, not because of me. That's an in spite of me.
Often, yeah. So,
but let's go back to
takeaway there.
Yeah.
Tilt them to the front, and the screen bottom board helps for that issue. If you don't get them tilted to the front. And then, so we'll get back to where you were started. Do you need a medium or a honey super your first year? I have definitely had people get a package or catch a swarm early, and it build quickly.
Especially if you feed it. You really do need to feed the packages that you pick up.
And they drew both deeps, and they're like, and it's still honey flow, and they're like, well, what do I do now? And I'm like, you got that honey super. Now's a good time to put that on there and start getting it drawn.
Yep.
And so that's sort of an optional, right? Like you wouldn't have to initially buy it.
I'd say 25% of the time, they'll produce enough honey that you'll have to have a honey super, and that you'll be able to pull honey off of that first year.
But I don't know what 25% of the time means for beginners. Does that mean 1 out of 4 beginners needs it, or does that mean if you buy 4 hives,
100% beginners need it, and
1 out of 4 will
1 out of 4 will actually use it first year.
And then your second year, you'll definitely end up using it. So by your second year, you should have at least 2 honey supers per hive.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Now, when the real point of my question, so I agree with everything that Steve just said. I'd also add that you need some method available or in your mind on how you're going to manage your mites. However, if you're going to get an isoleic acid smoker, if you're going to get something that you put in there, if you're going to get Formic Pro, have something in mind so that you know how to.
Yeah, a lot of the commercial mite treatments don't require additional equipment for you to purchase, right? Your Formic Pro is just a strip. Apistrand is a strip. What's the one in the little dish?
I don't remember.
The one's still a little dish, right? You buy it, you pull the foil off the top, put the dish on, right? Yep. So all of those are easily, identify good mite control options that don't require additional equipment.
And I would say that I would have some kind of check system where you can check you can do your wash. A voarra mite wash. That thing's like $20. I would just have it on hand.
Yep.
And as far as number of hives, though,
a local club or mentor, you're like, hey, what's important for a beginner? Local club or mentor. You know, if you're not able to, certainly a mentor is the best option, but there's a shortage of those in a lot of the beekeeping area communities. So if you're not able to come up with one of those, at least seek out a local club for a resource.
Take a class.
Yeah.
Absolutely take a class. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the 8-hour classes, right? It's too much information to absorb at once, but it's better than no class at all.
Yeah.
So if you can get a hands-on class, even better.
I know a guy who does like a three-part.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do hands-on classes through Riverview Road Apiary. I don't get very many takers. I've had a few takers, but not.
It's a little pricey.
It is pricey, but again, it's also all the stuff that you need.
Yeah, and it's also not just one day fire hose at you, right? Yeah. It's going to be a multi-part, multi-week, hands-on each of those.
And I think that's ideal.
Right, and absolutely.
So, and then I would get a book too, Beekeeping Beekeeping for Dummies or the Backyard Beekeeper. Those are the 2 ones that I always suggest.
And if you're not a big book person, then there's some good YouTube channels out there if you want to watch some beekeepers do beekeeping things.
But I like to have a book because bring it to the yard with you to look at pictures. We were just looking at pictures last meeting, right, in the American Bee Journal, ABJ.
Yeah.
When we were discussing, this is EFB versus paralytic mite syndrome, which they look very similar.
Yeah.
If you've ever been unlucky enough to have them, and if you do beekeeping for any extended period of time, you will. They look very similar. And,
I remember what's her face
pictures
that came in to talk about EFB, and I asked, these look identical to photos that you would take for parasitic mite syndrome. She's like, absolutely. She's like, there's really, the only way you can tell is a test for EFB.
Basically, yeah.
So, start with a mite test, right? If your mite counts are off the charts, and that's the easy thing to do to start with is a mite treatment. So
the other part that we didn't really get to is how many hives do you start with? And we've kind of talked about this in the past. 2. So that's my standard is 2.
It's twice the cost, but
and have a box for a nuke.
Yep.
Right. So it's 2. You don't have to have a nuke. You don't have to have another third hive sitting there.
But I guarantee you, as soon as your friends know that you're a new beekeeper, you will get all of every time there's a swarm pop up in the spring
or wasp nest.
Yeah.
People are going to anything that's flying that's black and yellow.
Yep.
That is in a cluster somewhere.
And so that 5-frame nuke is an excellent tool to go out and pick up a swarm with.
Yeah, and I think that's
those are freebies.
That's not usually freebie swarms, but yeah, that's something that's not usually discussed. Right? Is have a nuke box.
Hopefully, they don't come with EFB. We think they might be our biggest source of EFB infections for our apiaries.
Yeah. If there's a swarm out there and it's smaller than a softball, my rule of thumb is do not bring it back to your apiary. If you want to capture,
there's a good tip. Yeah, bring it to
an out yard somewhere.
An out yard that's your.
Bring it to your house, right? You can bring it. Like I have my out yard's basically my house. It's far enough away from my apiary that I'm not really worried about cross contamination, and I have had a few sputter out there.
Yep.
That just not going to make it.
So swinging over to the stuff we found in the news on beekeeping, I guess we've got some new, and tailing on to our mite treatment conversation, I guess we have some new potential mite treatments on the horizon here. Are they any approved, or are we just...
No, this is approved. Viroxan is the one that is now approved and for sale. Daydot sells it.
Yeah.
And it's an oxalic acid strip like Apiguard.
Okay.
So you kind of put it's 2.5 strips per brood frame.
I thought it was 1 strip per 2.5 brood frames.
Yep, that's the right way. 1 strip per 2.5. Yep. Forgive my math. So 1 strip per 2.5 brood frames, and you hang it down in between, and it's oxalic acid,
which is nice because a lot of the methods that we have for treatment, they don't do a good job in trying to scale the amount of treatment to the amount of brood. Like if we presume that we have the more brood you have, the more mites you have, because the mites replicate in
the cells,
in the brood when you're raising brood. It stands. You sort of logic out that the more brood you would have, the potential for a higher mite load you would have.
Yeah.
And a lot of our current treatments don't seem to scale well for the difference between a 5-frame nuke and like a box as tall as you are.
Right. Well, and then so I'm interested to see how effective it is in knocking down numbers, because the strips, if you read any of like Randy Oliver's research on these, because I think these seem to be like the market available strips that Randy Oliver was
basically. So the Randy Oliver Scientific Beekeeping, he's been working on trying to get an effective mite treatment based off of soaking. His thing was he tried
sponge is what they
a shop towel, blue shop towel. He started with paper towels, but I think they're
a sponge now.
Their emissivity rate, the rate at which it evaporated off the towel, was too fast, and so he worked with different substrates that allowed for different emissivities, which is the fancy word for like how fast something evaporates or gives off.
Right.
So I guess this is basically sounds like a commercial implementation of the thing that he's been trying to work on for like the past, 10 years now?
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about it is, to me, is that all the research I read for him for that is that will not reduce your mite numbers. It will keep your mite numbers flat. So if you start with a hive with low mite counts, they'll stay low.
So you think this is intended to be a maintenance?
I think oxalic acid in a pad is going to be a maintenance thing. I don't know. Right? This is something. This is brand new. In fact,
be
so
curious
today,
to see if
so
they
today
have.
I'm going to actually go pick some up. So
Yeah.
somebody ordered some, and they said, "Hey, I have these. Do you want some of them?" And I said, "Sure, I'll take a couple just to take a look at what they are, because I don't know what they are." But yeah, it would be interesting to see compared to, and it's oxalic acid, so it doesn't penetrate the cell caps, right?
Yep.
So there's wax that's normal compared to Formic Pro. If you put Formic Pro on there and you put 2 strips in there, they will penetrate the cell caps. Will also likely kill your queen.
Well, they talk about, like, Formic Pro is very clear in their instructions that their 2 strips is intended as a
Emergency treatment.
Yeah. So, like, if you have a really bad count and you're seeing the classic signs of serious mite loads, parasitic mite syndrome and things like that, right? Deformed wing virus, that is when the 2 strips is recommended. Treatment is the 2 strips versus 1 strip for 10 days and then the second strip for another 10 days, right?
And that will still, but those 2, that 10 and 10, will lower your mite numbers.
Yeah.
That will kill off your mite numbers. Same with oxalic acid, vaporization. The things that I've read and the talks that I've gone to said for
in your
grams
experience.
Yeah, right. And my experience says when you use the correct volume and you do it 5 to 7 days, the correct volume, and from what I've seen, is 4 grams per box. Right.
Yep.
That's not the legal volume, but that is, to me, that is the correct volume. 4 grams per box every 5 to 7 days, you have a decrease in mite count. And so this will be interesting to see what these are. I plan on using them as I'll probably do 2 tests, right? One will be, hey, we'll keep the mite counts low. We'll start putting in one that has low mite counts and keep it low. And we'll put it in one that has high mite counts
And see
if they drop.
if it, yeah. So the Honeybee Hotline is where we try to answer some questions that we've received since our last podcast. They may come from students or around the area. If you have questions, you can get a hold of us and leave us a question. We'll be happy to answer it or talk about it on the podcast. This week, I think a lot of our questions, because we're coming into fall, we had a good discussion concerning taking your losses now. So in other words, if you've got some weak hives,
It's a nice way of putting it.
yeah. Do some newspaper combines this time of year, between now and October.
Well, let's talk about what a weak hive is, right? So my definition of weak hive would be less than 9 frames of bees covering the frames. Less than 9 frames of bees. Now, in deeps, not mediums. Less than 9 frame of bees covering a deep. If you have mediums, I guess it'd be
about twice that.
Twice that.
Yeah.
Right? At least, yeah. So if you have less than that going into winter, you have a lower percent ability to survive the winter.
So to put it in a slightly different perspective, if you're going through a hive and you pull off the inner cover, you're 2 deeps, you pulled honey back in July 4th weekend, so you took your mediums off. Now you had 2 boxes. They were supposed to work those 2 boxes. Your ideal look right now is if you pull that inner cover off and you look down and you see nothing but capped honey, and you pull that middle frame out and you see a nice rainbow patch of brood in the bottom third, and the rest of it is a honey cap. That's a great looking. That's a hive that looks like it's going to be set up great for winter.
Yeah.
And you still have a laying queen. I still need brood being in there. I can't just be like queenless, right? Because you're going to have a problem, obviously.
We have to be real careful this time of year because they are slowing down their laying.
Right.
So every year around this time, I get all kinds of calls of my queen's gone.
Yeah.
Or I don't have no eggs that I can find. And usually I encourage somebody to go out with a cell phone, right, and video looking at the frames so that you're looking down in the frames. Because the eggs are small, and as we get older, our eyes aren't working as good as they used to. Another thing you can do is you can train a teenager and have them come out with you, have good eyes, to see those eggs. Because the panic calls that I get for, I don't have a queen left, is I get a lot of those, and I would say half the time or so.
I mean, probably shouldn't be getting worried. You know, like if you still got fat C's there, right? You still got some white squishy larvae, which you can see without problems. Now, you're probably still fine.
Now, if you squished your queen, right? Because we've both done it, right? Steve told the story earlier in the year, right?
Yeah.
When we cut the queen in half. If you've squished her, then you don't have a queen.
Probably going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the ideal, right? So if I pull that upper box and there's not a lot of activity in it, and it's light, there's not a lot, and maybe they're working one frame in it, they're kind of working it as one honey frame. I pull that box off and I go down below, and they're working the box, right? They're laying it, but they're only working like the center of 5 or 6 frames, right? Like that is the population of a box that could easily be reduced down to a single 10 frame. That's probably a population that's not going to have a high survival rate for our Midwest winters. Yeah. And so that's a good candidate for me to say, hey, is there an opportunity there to make a combine with another hive that is also in the same state? And so the question at the local meeting was, okay, so I have that. How do I pick which queen? Like, how do I pick which hive is the winner and which hive is the loser? Yep. And I said, well, that's a great opportunity for you to look at them and go, well, this queen is 2 years old and this queen is a year old, or this queen is new this spring, right?
Which is a good opportunity or a good reason to mark your queens.
Correct.
So you're keeping track of that stuff.
Because while we talk about taking notes, like I couldn't tell you when I've had queens. Like the only way I would be able to tell you when I have queens out there is to go out there and look at marks, the colors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and they swarm, right? You're not out there all the time. What happens if you missed it and they swarmed, or what happens if they requeened, right? Like that happens, right? And
so this year's color is green. So if I go out in the yard, if you put a green queen in this year because she came green in your package, or you marked her as green this spring, and you go out there now and you can't find a green queen, and you get a queen, guess what? She got replaced.
Well, and they'll chew some of that paint off. So sometimes you're just looking for like a ring.
Yeah, a ring
that's left of the paint. And then next year will be blue, and you can find all that stuff online. There's some real pretty ones, pretty drawings of it too, but it's basically just the last digit of the year.
So when you're making a choice there, if one hive made good honey for you and another one didn't, and honey's important to you, pick the one that made good honey, right? If you had one that was just a pain in the ass to deal with, and one of them that was super nice, pick the one that was super nice if that's important to you, right? So,
or if the mite count, you had one that had a low mite count throughout the year, and it's still low, by all means, you choose that one. But what's important to people varies pretty dramatically. And it's important when you're buying queens from people to ask, is there something that you're breeding for specifically for your queens? Many people will just say, no, I'm just breeding queens, right? I'm just making them. Or VSH hygiene. And oftentimes, unfortunately, we don't test that VSH hygiene. But, have that conversation anyway. And your beekeeper that you're buying your stuff from should be honest and upfront with you. This time of year, if I was replacing a queen, I would be doing a newspaper combined sort of replacement.
Yeah. So you pick your one that you want to keep, and then you're gonna identify your other one.
Yeah. Or even if you had just a queen that, hey, I'm 100% sure I don't have a queen, she's dead, I'm buying a queen, it's going to be more expensive, right? I'm going to buy 2 or 3 frames from somebody that has a queen on it, and then I'm going to newspaper combine that in, and then I'm going to condense it down in 5 to 7 days, right? So that I actually have a nice condensed hive.
Because that's the other part of that, right? Because once you do your newspaper combine, you still have to go through and try to reduce because they probably don't have space, right? There's probably a lot of empty frames in there still.
Yeah, absolutely.
So probably still going to have to be fed.
Yep.
If you want to do some 4/4 Palmer nukes, you could try that. Put 2 small ones together. Take that 10 frame that's not doing well and make it into a 4/4 and feed it, and put it in the same box as your other one. And maybe you get lucky and they're overwinter together as a 4/4. You've had some pretty good luck with your 4/4s.
My Palmer nukes have really done well year after year. And I don't know if it was because this is the first year I've really bumped my vaporization levels, my oxalic acid. So I don't know if it was like a smaller area that had a higher amount, right? So the dosage was correct for the area, or if it's just they chimney really well. Bees build up. When I say they chimney, they like to build up a whole lot. In fact, you'll see as you are, especially new beekeepers, they'll build up in the middle and then slowly spread out to the side frames. Those side frames are the last things to get drawn. And the Palmer nukes are built in a manner that you have 4 frames and 4 frames are above it, and they just they build way up very quickly and are really happy in that setup.
And they're, I don't know why, but I have seen and talked. I've seen it written online. I've talked to other beekeepers, and there seems to be a consensus that the hives respond really well to being condensed, tight hives. Giving them a ton of space. They don't
protect it.
They don't seem to do as well. They don't, like, you would think that, hey, it's the sort of the growth thing, right? If they had, 2x space, they would do twice as better, and that's just not that just doesn't seem to hold in terms of how productive or how strong the colony feels.
So my theory on that is that the average temperature and the average humidity is really protected in a hive. And if I have a smaller area, especially in a chimney effect, right, where heat goes up and moisture goes up, I can control that humidity better. And that's just a theory. That is not I've not gone through and proven anything, but in my mind, if I'm an organism that requires those things, and honeybees do, that's why.
My overall point here is, though, this is the time of year when you should be doing a hard look at how much space your hives have.
Absolutely.
And
honest look, right?
Doing reductions on the ones that, if they're not using that bottom box for whatever reason, like we had guys come up to say, hey, I looked into my bottom box, I was like basically completely empty. I'm like, yeah, pull it off. If they're not using it, pull it off.
Yeah. Reduce the space that they have to protect. And you need to be honest with yourself when you're looking at those things too. That's something that we as beekeepers, you always want to hope that they're doing pretty good, and I hope that they're doing good. And we kind of lie to ourselves about some of that stuff. Just be real honest. It's not a failure on your part if they're not doing well.
It's because they're all individual hives, right? they're all slightly different. I also think that's why there's significant advantages is not the right word. There's a significant going to somebody else's apiary and looking at their hives and looking at how they run their apiary, how they work their hives, and what their hives look like. Like if you stay in your lane, you stay in your 2 hives, and that's your only data point, right? Like it can be really hard to learn.
Yeah.
Because one of the beginners, right?
And go when you're doing this, don't go trying to educate somebody.
Yeah.
Go with an open mind and see what they're doing, learn what they're doing.
What does their stuff look like, right?
What are they doing and what does their stuff look like, and take something away.
Because you're going to have one of 3 options, right? Their stuff is going to look just like your stuff, in which case either you're both hurting or you're both exactly where you're supposed to be. Yours are going to look better, in which case you're going to feel really good about yourself, or yours are going to look worse and you're going to have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Right? But the point is, it's all good data for you to come away with. And as a beginner, one of the most difficult things that I've had beginners question is, how do I know when they're too crowded and I need to add space in the spring? Or how do I know that they've got too much space now and you need to get rid of it? And there's no, like, maybe you could find some YouTube videos that have shot enough clips to like, hey, this is clearly needs space and this clearly needs space reduced. But the reality is, for me, it was just years of experience at seeing different levels of activity of different hives and understanding, hey, this one needs more space. And
for me, there was some playing around with it too, right? Particularly in spring, where one needed space, and I thought, oh, well, if one box is good, two boxes must be better, and 3, well, that's probably even better. And if you hit the flow just perfect, that can work out. And if you don't, then they just don't touch anything above the one box, and they just fill out one box.
Or on the other side of that coin is you weren't paying attention. You only put one box on. They filled the box in a week, and then they swarmed a week later because they were out of space.
Yeah. Or they were in the middle of swarming anyway. And there's all kinds of things. There's all kinds of variables in there, and you need. But it's a real interesting dance with bees to figure out who's where, and when should they be there.
And again, getting that data is best done by just putting eyes on hives. And the more hives you can put eyes on, the more you'll learn about how to do the things we're talking about.
And the faster you'll learn. And we're walking up into winter, into this off season. In your winter, there's lots of talks that are out there. Go to some presentations. Go pull up some YouTube videos and watch and listen, and openly listen. Right? Question why they're doing stuff or why they're telling you the stuff they're telling you. But yeah, absolutely go do that stuff and grow as a beekeeper in the off season, because, as we all know, the on season can be a blur of activity.
Oh yeah, it seemed like just last week I was taking honey off, right? And that was 3 months ago. Right. So I guess to wrap up here, the last question that we had a lot of the last couple weeks was questions about beginners knowing that it's at the end of the beekeeping season. They've watched their friends or neighbors get excited about beekeeping and participate in beekeeping, and they're like, toward the end, I think I understand that I need to get started in the spring, so is there something I need to do now to prep for 2025's beekeeping season?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I guess my short answer on that would be find a club, right? Find a club that you like locally. We're lucky here that we have like 2 kind of local clubs, Ziba and Hiba, right? Bloomington and Peoria. Find a mentor, like we've talked about. Get your equipment and get it painted. And take a class or line up a class for spring and read a book.
There's a lot of new beginner. Most clubs are doing their new beginner classes in January and February.
Yeah, absolutely.
You typically have to have your new packages placed and ordered by the end of February. I know the guy that we get a lot of ours from, he's pretty lenient on how late he'll take an order, because his supplier is pretty flexible on being able to add ones and twosies here and there.
He'll give a discount too if you order in like December.
So certainly keep an eye on, as we roll farther into winter. If you're a woodworking hobbyist, and one of the reasons why you want to do beekeeping is because you've got a woodworking shop and there's a lot of woodenware in beekeeping, then this is the time of year to get your raw material and start cutting out bee boxes and assembling bee boxes. Or I don't know that I would ever recommend trying to build the frames from scratch. The reality is the automated manufacturing that churns that out at a cost is just not, you just can't compete with it.
Yeah,
But you can certainly get unassembled frames and put them together yourself.
Yeah, and I would do that at least once so that you understand the frames and why they work and how they're put together and things like that.
You can also be a real challenge to find, like if you're dedicated to a natural wax foundation beekeeping as opposed to using plastic foundation, it'll be a real challenge to find assembled wired frames or assembled frames without plastic foundation.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're on that path, if that's your preferred way to do beekeeping, then you will likely have to assemble your own frames in order to put your own natural wax foundation in them.
And it is the harder. It's the harder way.
It's more time consuming.
It's the harder way.
It's kind of there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I think I still prefer my natural wax over the plastic.
Absolutely. I mean,
however, for you running 80 hives, you just don't have the time.
No, I don't.
Which is what really propelled the wax foundation market in the past 10 or 15 years in development was the commercial guys. They realized that
they didn't have the time to spend.
They can snap a piece of plastic in the frame in 10 seconds versus having to spend a minute.
And I have a wax melter now too, so I snap the frame, snap it in, dip it in the wax melter, throw it in the hive.
Yeah,
and that takes me all of a minute.
Yeah,
so
I think we're at the end of another episode of Beekeeping Buddies. We hope you enjoyed what we talked about this week. As a reminder, we do have the website. We do have several locations where you can find us. You want to leave us a question, you can email us. And we do have a Patreon, I guess, that's set up. So if you want to support the podcast, you have that option. Otherwise, stay tuned for next episode where we'll be talking about all of our adventures around the bee yard. Thanks for listening.